go?
You know, the German government was required to furnish a number of servants. And in this house we were living in, which I called the mansion, we had a Hausmeister who ran everything, and his wife. And we also had a cook, as I said. We got rid of her. She smeared butter on her arms, and that's how she stole butter out of the house. Took it home, scraped it off, and used it. I mean, things were tough then
Yeah.
for the Germans. I mean, things like paper you couldn't get. American cigarettes on the black market were worth $100 a carton. And of course, we didn't do on the black market because Dad would have been in trouble. But paper was hard to get and stuff like that. And this mansion, as I said, was fenced. We had our own Polish guard to protect it. And the reason they used Polish guards are they didn't feel like they could trust the Germans with a weapon of any sort. So, you know, we really, really lived well. And after we'd been there for about 6 or 7 weeks, our stuff came over from the US, and I got my bike. And I went out, I had rheumatic fever, and I went out and rode the bike in the backyard. And we had a way long backyard. And my mother saw me, she screamed, because I wasn't supposed to be doing that much exercise. And I remember my dad coming home and saying, "George, if you want to die, just jump out that window head first." You know, I mean, he was upset. And of course, I didn't. I mean, I was okay. I didn't have any murmur or anything. I survived that well.
And you didn't jump out the window.
No, I voted against the window jump.
And Bob didn't jump out the window either?
He did not set an example. But yeah, we enjoyed our time in northern Germany. But let's go back to just before we left for northern Germany, when we were in New York and I was going to PS 189. I ate lunch every day at my dad's folks. Now, they lived about 2 blocks from us on 193rd Street also. And I would walk from school and eat lunch with them, or with her, my grandmother, and she would fix things like lamb chops, which I loved. She'd fix me a dessert of bananas and cream and sugar, and, I mean, probably stuff I should never eat, you know, and now I can't eat it. But I mean, she just spoiled me rotten, and so she says, because I looked so much like my dad at that time. So anyway, back to Germany. Oh, by the way, my mother's folks, and sometimes I say Nen and my mother are synonymous. And my brother started that because he couldn't pronounce Virginia, so he would say Virginia and then changed to Nenny and then shortened to Nen. And her folks lived in Westwood, New Jersey, and her dad was a good disciplinarian. So while my dad was overseas, my mother had problems disciplining Bob, so she sent him to live with her folks. And I guess they kept him in line. I don't know. But was the connection there. So back to Germany. We were in northern Germany in the Enclave for almost a year. At that place, there was not a school for American children, so we were tutored. And the tutor didn't want to teach us German because he said that was a dead language. Well, my mother refused to accept that. The Germans were very much down at that point in time. And not all Germans were Nazis, okay? But our Hausmeister had been in the German army. He would tell some stories about it. And one thing I liked about him, he was a pro at ping pong, and he taught me ping pong. I mean, how to put spin on the ball and stuff like that. And we had the ping pong table in the basement. And also in the basement, we had our own fireman. He was responsible for the furnace and the generator out back. We had our own generator because you couldn't depend on the electrical service of the local supply. And interestingly enough, my sister would speak to him in German. She learned German. Of course, kids learn languages well. But she wouldn't speak German to anybody who could speak English, but she'd speak to him in German. And eventually, we narrowed our servants down to two, Court and Duchess Taust. Court was the housemeister and Duchess was his wife. She turned out to be our cook. And then we got transferred to 7847th Ammo Depot in Bamberg, Germany. It's in Bavaria. And we drove. I mean, that's all you could do. We drove our car south. At one point in time, we made a bad turn and we got stopped by some Russians. And then they were taking people and holding them. And we had Ginger, of course, in the car, and the baby, and my brother and I, and my mother and dad. And of course, my dad was in uniform. And the officer at the station said, "Sir, I suggest you turn your car around and go the other way because you're now in the Russian zone." And my dad saluted him, and we did. But that was a little bit of an experience, you know. At first we were thinking, "Oh man, are we in trouble now?" But driving south, I mean, you had the Autobahn, which was great highways, but every place there was a bridge that wasn't there anymore, so you had to go this detour way down into the valley and back up. But we finally got to Bamberg and the 7847th Ammo Depot, and my dad had charge of several different installations there, all ordnance installations. And at the one where we lived, they were disposing of old German artillery and rifle stuff and ammunition and dynamite too. And dynamite, you have to turn periodically to keep it from crystallizing. And it wasn't getting turned periodically, it was sitting in these bunkers. And these bunkers, they had walls as thick as a car, and trees actually growing on top of the bunkers so they couldn't be seen from the air. It's a really neat place. And I remember one day one of those bunkers blew up. It threw big blocks of concrete, you know, for hundreds of feet. And in 5 minutes, every fire engine in the city of Bamberg was coming through our gate because they didn't want it to spread. So that was exciting. But we pretty much had the run of the place. Actually, I had a sergeant who befriended me, and he taught me how to drive a Jeep. And we would check the guards every night. And I would drive. Of course, my dad knew nothing about that. He would have had a heart attack. And then later, one time, he says, "Hey, George, you want to learn how to drive a truck?" We had a deuce and a half. We were in the back someplace, and he taught me how to drive it around and stuff like that. And my dad never knew anything about that until after we were back in the States. A few years later, when Bob was trying to get his driver's license, and he was having trouble parallel parking, and he says, "Oh, George could do that better than me." I said, "What?" And that's when he found out. Boy, he was livid. He said, "Do you know what that would have cost me? I mean, really, could have gotten in big trouble." So, and I can't blame Bob for the driver's license. The guy never took him. And
You can blame him for your dad finding out about it, though.
That's true. Well, Dad never disciplined me or anything else at that point in time. But we did other stuff. I mean, they had stacks of crates of rifle boxes or whatever you call them, and stacks of them all empty. Bob got in there, he started building a maze in there. We moved boxes around, we had a place we could crawl. And of course I did that too. And there were things like that, you know, I'm sure at some point in time somebody discovered it and probably had a fit or two. And then behind our house, there was a fence, and then there was an old German officers club, which nobody was using, all kind of woodsy area. And Dad asked my brother and I to clean it up because he wanted to have a surprise anniversary party or birthday party for Nan. And so, you know, we'd get over there and we'd start working on it. My mother caught us, she'd yell at us. She said, "You're not supposed to be over there." And finally she got the people in the, I don't know, the landscaper division or something to rake that area because she was afraid we'd get in there and there'd be mines or something. And so they raked it and they started burning the leaves, and all of a sudden, it was ammunition. Belts, and they all ran, of course, and the fire department ran out, and then another string of bullets would come off, and they finally got it out, and they raked it. My brother and I finished cleaning it up, and on the night of the party, Dad took us all in a Jeep to go around checking the guards, and we approached that area. We were coming to that area. And there were some people walking across the lawn, and you could hear somebody yell, "Hey, hurry up, hide, here they come," and which kind of gave it away. And so anyway, the party went off well, but I thought that was kind of neat. My dad was neat. He did a lot of neat things. So and that was a fun place. I mean, we had some terrific vacations. We went to Garmisch, and we had the hotel there in Garmisch that was usually housing rich skiers, was now housing military vacationers, and we got to ride cable cars. We got to go up the cog railway to the Zugspitze mountain, to the top of that, and then there was a cable car that went to the very top. And then we had another vacation at Lake Chiemsee, which is another vacation area where we were on a lake, and my brother and I would take a canoe and paddle. While there we were very close to Austria. I'm trying to think of the town, Salzburg, and they had salt mines there, and we had a tour of the salt mine. And we wore miners' clothes and miners' caps. We rode a train into the salt mine. And then they had salt slides. You get down to a lower level. You know, I mean, boy, we were in our heyday there. And then way down deep in the mine, there was a lake we had to go across. And I mean, it was fantastic when we finally got out of there alive. And I was back there in the same area when I was working for Kraft Foods. And I tried to find the salt mine, couldn't find it. I didn't have enough time probably, and I didn't know how to explain it, but that was fun. I mean, we had fun vacations. Dad knew how to have vacations, he really did. And those vacations we didn't have to have camping. But although while we were at Fort Dix, we'd take vacations and we'd camp out, and Dad would teach us about camouflage and stuff like that, how to, you know, hide in open spaces. Very interesting. We'd pick blueberries. Bob and I would go pick blueberries in this field. When Dad found out about it, he had a hissy. He says, you know, there's a lot of unexploded artillery, because that used to be part of the artillery range. So we didn't pick blueberries there anymore.
What was the best advice you ever got from your father?
Well, one, he taught me how to be a husband. He always set an example. He'd go, I mean, when the boys didn't, he would wash the dishes. When later on, I mean, he and then were by themselves, he would empty the load and empty the dishwasher and things like that. He considered it a partnership, and that's a thing that he instilled in me. You know, women aren't just characters, they're worth having around. So, but, and honesty, integrity, I mean, his integrity was above reproach, really. He was an honorable man, I remember when they were retired in Atlanta, he bought a rototiller from Sears, and he was using it to make a basement to build an extension on his house, which you guys saw. And Sears sent him another one. And he called him up, he explained to him that he'd already had one, and he sent him another one by mistake, they might want to come pick it up. Oh no, we don't do things like, we don't make mistakes like that, you know. It took him about 3 or 4 phone calls. Finally, he convinced them to come get it. I mean, a lot of people would have just sold it, you know, maybe even me included. But I mean, my dad was, I mean, his integrity was above reproach. He was not going to be bargained away or bribed. But anyway, that's getting ahead of the story. In southern Germany, I actually went to an American school. The Germans had an elementary school. They called it on the Dom or the Dome, I forget. But anyway, Americans had half of that school. We had like grades 1 through 4 together, and then grades 5 through 8 together. And I was in the 7th grade, and there was 2 other people in the 7th grade. But I mean, we were schooled. We were schooled by an English-speaking American person. Well-schooled, I must say. But from where I lived, you know, most of the military headquarters in the city of Bamberg, but we lived on the ammo depot, so we had to have transportation for me. And at one point in time, they routed the school bus from where the other people were down to where pick me up. They'd go pick up the other people and go to school. And then they decided, oh, that was too much trouble, so they just started driving me to school in a Jeep. So there was good things and bad things about where we lived. My brother and I had our bicycles. We would ride all over, and you know, one time I was riding along following Bob. Bob turned around and I kept going, and I stopped and said, "Where are you going, Bob?" Meanwhile, 2 guys on bikes behind us passed, and he was afraid that, oh, maybe they were, because at that point in time, you know, there were still some ill feelings. And I know a bunch of us got surrounded by a bunch of German displaced kids, and one of the guys ran to our front gate and got the MPs to come out in their Jeep, and there was no more problems. But we lived on the ammo depot, and on the other side, I don't know where it was, but there was a Circle C Cowboys, we called them, Constabulary Corps, and they had American Independence there too. We kind of met at school, and then we got together after school and did things, played football in a big football field that would have belonged to somebody, I don't know who. But a lot of sightseeing, visited a lot of castles, a lot of cathedrals. It's amazing. And another thing that was amazing is when we were in northern Germany, the amount of damage by our bombs to Bremerhaven and then south to Bremen was extensive. Matter of fact, there was still rubble in the streets, which they were cleaning up. And we went to Bremen with a bunch of officers to a restaurant called the Rathskeller, which was in a cellar. And I remember they had these huge, huge big vats of wine, I guess they were. And interestingly enough, years later, in 90 something, I was working for Kraft. I was over there, and the plant manager at one of the plants that I was doing a safety audit on took us to that same restaurant. And I remember, I didn't remember weight or anything like that, but I mean, it was kind of interesting, you know, and that was still standing. And of course, Berlin by that time had been cleaned up quite a bit, and there was no rubble in the streets. But that was an experience that you realize that nobody really wins a war. We got to go to the war crimes trials in Nuremberg, which is about 35 kilometers south of, or miles which, I'm not sure which, of Bamberg. And at that time they were trying the guys that ran the concentration camps. And before they showed these films, they says, you know, women and children may be excused if they like, because this is pretty graphic. And it was graphic. Man's inhumanity to man is just unbelievable. I mean, they showed pictures of these people, they go in, they think they're gonna take a shower, and they get in the shower area, and there were shower heads and stuff like that. And then we're gassed. And they form a big pyramid, climb on top of each other, trying to get above the gas. And the pits where they burn people and stuff like that. You know, it's a memory that some people, they want to deny. But, you know, we've seen it. Eisenhower ordered photographs made of it so people wouldn't forget, because that's something you don't want to forget. Yeah, and the eye can never unsee anything it's seen. So that's made an indelible memory on me as a kid. And at that point in time, I said, if I'm ever in a position like that, I will never be captured. You know, no way. And the way the Japanese did the same kind of thing, I'm sure, I don't care who the enemy is. We may not be the best in the world, but we're better than most. And Germany, as I say, was an education, an experience. When we came back from Germany, just before we left, I sold my bike. I bought my bike for $32.50, and it was a girl's bike because I was short. I couldn't reach a boy's bike. And I sold it to a guy in Germany for $35, a GI. He wanted to give it to his girlfriend. But so I made a profit on it. That was to go to my next bike. But when we got ready to leave, you know, they always pack up stuff, and they use green lumber, which of course is heavy. And our household goods were all packed. We moved to Arlington, Virginia, where Dad was stationed at the Pentagon. When we finally got our goods, we were overweight, over the weight allowance. That's because of the weight of the wood. And we're in a quandary because we had a claim we wanted to file, but on the other hand, we didn't want to have to pay for the overweight, so it was kind of a wash. But there I went to Washington and Lee High School. And a year later, we had a beautiful house, but the heating bills were horrible. So, you know, Dad was not anxious to keep that. I mean, we paid for that, the rent. And then, so we moved to Alexandria when he was transferred to the Army War College, and which was an honor. People to try to get to that or want to get in that. And we lived in a third-floor apartment in Alexandria, Virginia, and I went to Mount Vernon High School, and which was a bus ride away. First school I walked to. And we lived on a third-floor apartment, and our goods, Nen always had a grand piano. We lived on the third floor. And the guys, movers came with 4 guys, and Dad had gotten 4 others. Because that piano, I think it weighed like 1,500 pounds or something, one step at a time. I mean, and they got it up there. And that was a fun place, you know. I mean, I was taking girls at the time, going roller skating and all kinds of stuff. And we'd roller skate in the streets, and I fell, broke my arm. And when it got it on the cast on Friday, on a Saturday, I went roller skating in a roller rink. Got knocked down, threw out the bad arm, broke it again. Now, this is one time when my brother didn't get me in trouble. I didn't want to tell my mother, so I stuck my hand in my pocket. And then it came time to eat, and I couldn't get my hand out of it. I couldn't bend my elbow. And so I kept standing around. She said, George, what are you standing around for? Sit down, we want to eat. Well, I can't get my hand out of the pocket. Well, I said, because it hurts too much. So then she found out I had busted my arm again. She said, you will not go roller skating for the next year. So she took me to the military dispensary, and they had some comment like, you again? And well, I was getting allergy shots at the time, rather regularly, and all the nurses knew me and loved me, because when the GIs were there getting shots, they would march me to the head of the line and give me my shots, and I didn't cry. So I was setting an example, so I guess I was something back anyway. But I really enjoyed that area also, and then after that, we were supposed to go to Japan with the occupational forces. And as we were driving across country, my dad had already gone. As we were driving across country, we heard the news about Korea. And they immediately stopped all dependents from traveling to Japan. So all of a sudden, okay, we're kind of homeless, what are we gonna do now? So we kept on driving, and we went to Los Angeles, 65th Street, and my Aunt Maureen, Nen's brother's wife, and her brother Roy were living there, and we rented a house in the same street, and that was nice. I enjoyed that. Then I went to George Washington High School it was, and I made a lot of friends, some of them good, some of them bad. One bad guy I went with wasn't Bob. He skipped school and went to the beach. But the system there was you could buy these tickets for cheaper prices for the bus fare. And we had to add an extra one we were in a different zone, so we would hitchhike. Wrong, not supposed to do that, but we did anyway. And occasionally we'd have to take the bus. But, that was LA. And I didn't notice any real black versus white problems, although there were. Because we were pretty close to Mount Vernon Avenue, which was a dividing line, I think, between the white and the black. But then after we were there, about a year, Dad came back. While he was overseas, he was in Taipei, Taiwan. Well, first he was in MacArthur's staff in Japan, and he got sent to Korea at the beginning to decide what kind of armory and armament they needed there, and to make up a list for them to ship. And after he'd been in Korea for, I don't know how long he was in Korea, then he got transferred to Taipei, Taiwan, to see what the Taiwanese government needed, the Chinese nationals needed to defend themselves. And so he made some friends with Chinese people there. And then he finally came home. And when he came home, he was stationed at Fort MacArthur, which is in San Pedro, California. And so we moved to San Pedro. I moved to San Pedro High School. And that was the end of my 11th grade. And so I started started school there in the 11th grade.